Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us this evening in Douglas County, both in person and online. My name is Abe Layden, Chairman of the Board of County Commissioners, and tonight we're joined by some really esteemed guests to talk about a critically important issue in our community, human trafficking. And we are so thankful to be joined by some really significant panelists. And I just want to introduce, of course, Sheriff Darren Weekly, our new Douglas County Sheriff, who's already demonstrated a really significant commitment to this issue. Janelle Goodrich, the founder and executive director of From Silenced to Saved, who's really made a life and a career out of serving those in need in our community. Kelly Dorr, a survivor and the executive director of Sierra Cares Foundation, who isn't just on the county stage, she's on a state, national, and international stage, talking to even Parliament about this critically important issue. So we are so thankful. And Johanna Spill, founder and executive director of Covered Colorado, as well as Jacob Kremen, a prosecutor for the 18th Judicial District, and my commissioner colleagues, Laura Thomas and George Teal. Tonight we're talking about this topic because it is deeply relevant. Human trafficking is happening in Douglas County. It's a deeply impactful issue that most people don't know about. There are more human trafficking sites along the Front Range than there are Starbucks. I remember hearing that at my church several years ago, and the commissioners have been really active on this issue. We heard about House Bill 22-1300 a couple of years ago, which allowed counties to regulate massage parlors. And I'm thankful that our board unanimously took that legislation on and adopted a resolution that allows us to make sure that hotbeds for crime are getting background checks. And of course, we support the business community. We know that there are a lot of massage therapists, massage parlors that are doing good work out in the community, but we want to make sure that those that are endangered are being addressed appropriately. I also wanted to specifically introduce and welcome our esteemed guests from the state legislature. We're really thankful to have Representative Lisa Frizzell and Representative Brandy Bradley, who are here with us also. So thank you for joining us. That'll turn it over to Commissioner Teal.
Well, thank you, Commissioner Layden. Well, as Commissioner Layden talked about, we do have a panel of experts who have a lot of information to share, but we also want this live town hall to be interactive. We want to provide the answers that you want to ask. If you're joining us on the phone, press *3 on your telephone keypad to ask a question. For those online, please submit your question and our moderator will read it out loud. For those of you with us in the room, please raise your hand once we come into the audience with the microphone, and we'll bring you the microphone so everyone in the room, online and on the phone, can hear your question. We're also going to talk about what your local leaders are doing to prevent human trafficking while arresting and prosecuting those traffickers. This is a topic, quite frankly, that I almost feel like I'm probably going to learn as much as anybody. This is something that in my prior elected experience with the town of Castle Rock, we didn't have a lot of exposure to. And it's a topic that we've had to wrestle with here at the county level. And so I hope you're looking forward to hearing what is said tonight, because I sure am. Commissioner Thomas.
Thank you, Commissioner Teal. And I'd like to thank everyone for joining, both here in the audience and online. Tonight we're going to hear a survivor's story and learn about services that are available for survivors. I've been in law enforcement for many years, but I frankly have never worked involving a case of human trafficking. But for the people I know who are victims of human trafficking, what I know is that we need to be darn sure that we aren't re-victimizing them. We have several experts here tonight, including Douglas County Sheriff Darren Weekly. Sheriff, would you like to say a few words?
Thank you, Commissioner Thomas. One thing as your sheriff that I want for people to realize is, yes, this is Douglas County. This is a very safe, affluent community. But human trafficking does occur in Douglas County. We do have victims. We do have perpetrators in this county. That we have learned through our undercover operations and other things that we do. Really quick, I'd like to introduce Detective Randy Allen. Randy, would you go ahead and stand up for us? Randy is a Douglas County detective, but he's assigned to the FBI Innocence Lost Task Force. So I assure you, as your sheriff, I am committed to this issue. in Douglas County, but the things for parents to remember and people to remember that, yes, this does happen down here in the suburbs. With that, we'll get started with our moderator, Roger.
All right. Thank you, Commissioners and Sheriff Weekly. We look forward to getting to your questions tonight. As a reminder, to ask a question on your phone, press *3 on your keypad, and you will be transferred to an operator who will take down some basic information. Once the operator notes your information, you'll be returned to the call and can listen to the conversation till it's your turn. Since we would like to hear from as many people as possible, we will ask you to limit we'll ask all speakers to limit themselves to just one question. And when it's your turn, if you're on the phone, I'll call your name and ask you to repeat it for our live audience. If you are participating online, enter your question into the dialog box and I'll read it aloud when it comes up. And finally, if you are here with us live in the hearing room, please remember we need to bring you a microphone so everyone can hear your question. So with that, we are going to go back to Commissioner Layden to get us started.
Great. Thank you so much, Roger. Appreciate that. So to set the basis tonight, I'd like to start with Jacob Kremen, who again is a prosecutor with the DA's office. Jacob, can you first define human trafficking for all of us? What does the law say?
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner. Once again, my name is Jacob Kremen, and I serve on the Special Victims Unit for the 18th Judicial District and handle all human trafficking prosecutions for Arapahoe, Douglas, Elbert, and Lincoln County. When we are talking about human trafficking in the state of Colorado, we are really talking about two types of human trafficking. We're talking about human trafficking for involuntary servitude or labor trafficking, or human trafficking for sexual servitude, or more known as sex trafficking. And our statute divides that up into different elements that we have to prove at the DA's office beyond a reasonable doubt. And that is whenever somebody knowingly sells, recruits, harbors, transports, transfers, receives, isolates, entices, provides, or obtains by any means an individual for involuntary servitude or for commercial sexual activity. And a key phrase in here too is for coercing them into involuntary servitude or commercial sexual activity. We have to show that coercion is present when we're talking about adults. And that can be in the form of physical coercion, mental or emotional coercion, maybe the withholding of identification documents. There's really a broad range of what coercion can look like. And that's something that our legislature has actually committed to changing several years ago to include all these different verbs of what human trafficking could be and that coercion aspect. That's actually an undefined term in the human trafficking statute. And that's something that as law enforcement officers, we actually appreciate, because we want to be able to encompass the broad range of conduct that could be human trafficking. And what's very key to note is when we're talking about the trafficking of children, coercion is not an element that the people or the DA's office have to prove. Coercion is something that we only look for in adults because we acknowledge that there's no situation where a child could ever agree to be a part of a lifestyle of human trafficking.
Great. Thank you so much for that, Jacob. So with that definition in mind, I'd like the rest of our panel to introduce themselves and their organizations. So we'll start with Kelly Dorr, again, a survivor and executive director of Sierra Cares Foundation. Kelly.
Thank you, Commissioner. Yes, so my name is Kelly Dorr. I am the Executive Director of the Sierra Cares Foundation, and we actually operate in Western Africa, Sierra Leone, Africa. We really, the work that I do internationally is quite different than what I do here in the United States. So I'm actually the one of the only survivors in the United States that's actually held public office. So I was elected here in Colorado. My husband was elected at the same time. So you guys, please don't do that. I'm just gonna tell you that. But from that, I really recognize that we can create policy. We can do. We can put things forth, but if it's not applicable to the people that we're serving, and it's not applicable to the people that we're making these policies for, then it's just a piece of paper. And so since 2016, I've actually worked with state and federal legislatures, have written and authored almost 75 different pieces of state and federal legislation on human trafficking within the U.S. And then also I educate and work with Commissioner Layden said, parliaments and countries around the world. So I recently was appointed to ISTAC, the International Survivor Advisory Council. And so from that work, it's through the European Union, through the OSCE. So we basically create legislation, policy, and also bring forth even just documentation for survivors. Like what does it mean to be a survivor? We hear a lot of people are survivors, but it takes it's a lot different when you have to step up and be in survivor leadership. And so with that too, I also wrote the first mental health program for all of Africa. And we actually implemented that. And so it's being used as a model around the world. And then as a resident of Douglas County, I'm just very grateful to be here and grateful for our commissioners, because I do believe this is actually one of the first human trafficking meetings that any of the commissioners have ever done in this state.
Kelly, thank you for that. So next we'll turn to Janelle Goodrich, again, the founder and executive director of From Silence to Save. Janelle.
Thank you. So my name is Janelle Goodrich, and I am the founder and executive director and also active case manager of From Silence to Saved. We are the only case management child for children left in the state of Colorado right now. There is one placement for children, but it is not a placement that is done with DHS. So we are the only ones left in the state of Colorado serving children who are victimized by human trafficking. We are also prosecution motivated. We are the only law enforcement appointed anti-human trafficking organization in about 6 states, to my knowledge. And we work closely, respond on scene, go through extensive training, and take that victim survivor all the way from recovery to sentencing, and then partner with these ladies to put in the long-term care for when they turn into adults.
Great. Thank you so much for that, Janelle. Thank you for being with us. And then finally on our panel, Johanna Spill, again, the founder and executive director of Covered Colorado. Johanna.
Yes, thank you. Yes, my name is Joanna. I'm the founder and executive director of Covered. We work with survivors over the age of 18. Survivors have significant trauma that they need to help. We need to help them process. That can take a long time. That's a lengthy process. And so we run a safe home here in the Denver metro area that helps them do just that. We help them with housing, counseling, education, and community. Our whole goal is to help them be able to get back on their feet and get their lives back. A lot of people don't think that's possible, but it absolutely is. We have a lot of stories of hope of people that have been able to do that. So thank you.
Thank you for that. And because we have such esteemed guests here in the audience with us, I want to make sure that our representatives from the state legislature, if you would like to share anything with us, you good? Okay, here to listen and learn. Those are some really good legislators. Well, usually electeds are pretty good at being on the spot. So with that, I'll turn it to Commissioner Teal.
Thank you, Abe. So I just want to remind everybody, if you're joining us on the phone, to press *3 on your keypad if you would like to ask a question or make a statement. You can also participate online at douglas.co.us/town hall. First question this evening, we're going to take one of our questions submitted prior to the meeting, and this is from Beth. And Beth, her question is, my child is in middle school and has a cell phone. I think I have it pretty well locked down, but is he at risk? And Sheriff, can you tell us a little bit of what you think about that?
Yeah, it's always good for parents to be engaged with their children, know who their children are hanging out with, whatever type of electronic devices. There's a lot of different applications that are out there for parents to monitor what their kids are doing online. But parents also need to be aware of hidden apps and chat apps that are out there that kids might be using to try and deceive their parents from either knowing where they are or who they're communicating with. But it's very critical that parents always know and use those tracking apps to know where their kids are at and who they're communicating with. But if you just Google parent apps, there's a ton of them out there that you can select from just to know what your kids are doing. But again, it's very critical that the parents actually have to be engaged in looking at those things.
Thank you so much, Sheriff. Roger, do we have a question submitted live online?
We sure do. It came in from Patty. She asks, how can citizens recognize a trafficking situation?
And who would like to take that one? Well, yes, let's get one of our experts down towards the other side of the table. Don't all join at once.
Okay, so this is a very loaded question. Most trafficking situations start online. They're groomed. They're lured. That is what it is. It's not the white van. It's not being followed around in King Supers. It's not the zip ties that you're seeing on your car in Target that is circulating social media right now. Unfortunately, human trafficking is a crime and violation that hides in plain sight. And so sometimes it can go very, very unnoticed. So it's more about knowing maybe what the victim, survivor, the behaviors could be to notice those types of things. Maybe they're sleeping in, I'm speaking about children, but maybe they're sleeping in class. Maybe they're missing some school. Maybe they are having extra phones that they shouldn't have. Maybe they're having cash that they can't explain. There's a lot of different ways. Maybe their social media profiles are pretty provocative. Maybe they're referring to someone else's daddy. Maybe they're dating older men. There's a lot of different factors that go into this. Maybe they are a habitual runaway. Maybe they have an addiction problem. All of these things go in, but none of them are single-handedly just mean that they are a trafficking victim. So it can be very hard to spot. And these victims and survivors, they're discovered. They're not disclosed, especially when it comes to children and even adults. Multiple times, as you heard, that there's a task force officer here from FBI Denver, and they do constant operations and stings to try to monitor these things and make sure that they can catch them in their tracks and then give services where needed, because the victim comes first and then prosecution comes later. And I think that every officer and district attorney at this table would agree with me. So that's where I am with the children's side, unless you want to add something on the adult side.
No, that's really good. That's very similar to the adult side as well. But the one thing I would add is what we always tell people is traffickers are looking for vulnerable. They're looking for vulnerable people, and so that could be a single mom who is just trying to make ends meet, and someone comes along and says, "Hey, I've got a room at my house, and you can stay there. I'm just a good guy. You can stay there, and I'll even watch your kid for you." What we have to start doing in the community is we have to start knowing our neighbors. We have to start just being aware of situations in our churches and looking for the people who are vulnerable and watching out for them. And I think when we start doing that, we're going to start seeing it more and more. The people that have reported it to us, who have seen some of these situations, we've had just several churches recently say, "Hey, I think this is in my church and I'm not sure what to do with this." And they were correct. It was. But what they noticed was a kind of a gut feeling. They had a gut feeling something was wrong. And they noticed someone paying attention to someone who had just been in a very vulnerable situation. And I'm so thankful that they paid attention to that and spoke up and said something.
So panel, I want to talk about, like I told you as I started, this is not something that's been on my radar screen. This is not something that's been a focus of mine. But at the same token, can you help us to kind of break it down, understand the timeline of the trafficking? So first, who is most vulnerable? But then who's the buyer? Ladies, can you tell us about that?
So, yeah, I mean, so every case is different. And the hard part about human trafficking is it's not just like a one size fits all box. And so, and we've seen, especially with, within, 2020 and a lot of the last election and stuff, like, we saw a lot of social media posts. We see a lot of things being shared, really here in Douglas County, especially in more affluent counties, human trafficking mostly and the vulnerability starts in the home. So nearly 87% of child victims that end up turning into adult victims, it starts with some sort of sexual abuse or even grooming within their home. And so I think this is what's really hard to spot, especially within our communities, especially within even within parishes, because we don't necessarily want to look at our neighbors. We don't want to look at our family members. But that's the majority of where it's starting. And so, but we see movies, we see things, like the movie like Taken, where kids are being kidnapped and stuff like that. That is less than 1% of all human trafficking across the board. And so the majority of it is really, it's families that are vulnerable. It's poverty. We we've got families that are coming over where they don't have access to money, or they don't have access to even supporting themselves. And so one of the only ways that they have is to be trafficked. Sometimes we say there doesn't necessarily have to be a pimp for somebody to be trafficked. Poverty can also be the pimp. The other thing too is that culturally we have to recognize is that, in certain cultures, child sex abuse, grooming, things like that, it's not unheard of, and it's not unusual. And so a lot of people, and I say this all the time, especially for child survivors, there's people that are literally born into it, and it's generational, and it's generations of abuse going on and on and on. And so I think, those are things where we have to recognize across the board, and especially here, it's really the people, it's next door, it's in our communities. These are people that you see every single day. They're in our schools. One of the hardest places for us to get into right now across the board is public schools, because they will adamantly say there is no human trafficking happening. I can tell you that we did a study with the University of Virginia in 2016, 2018, and 2020, and we found one or more cases of human trafficking in every single public high school in the United States of America and most middle schools. And so this, again, this is where we have to recognize, not seeing the signs like they said, where children are, are they vulnerable? Are children overtly trying to create relationships with adults and not their own peers? And so there's just a lot of little things, and one of the things, especially in my situation, I grew up in a fairly affluent community and was being abused and trafficked, and nobody took notice. I told 7 adults from the age of 7 years old until I was 13 years old. And not one of those adults understood how to help me. They didn't understand what I was even saying, nor did they know where to go. And so, with awareness, we've changed that a little bit more. But we also have to be very careful with a lot of the stuff that we see on the internet, on social media, because when we share things that are not necessarily what's happening within our communities, we're actually harming survivors, and we're harming the work that people on the ground, like the 3 of us, actually do. And so that's another thing too. I always ask, before you share something, make sure you understand the source and make sure that it's from a valid place as well. Because in that, we're causing undue harm across the board as well.
Thank you very much, Kelly. Janelle, Johanna, ladies, please.
Yeah, the thing I would add to that is, nope, just forgot what I was going to say. Never mind.
We'll come back to it.
Right. A long day.
Do you want to repeat the question real quick? 'Cause Joanna just threw me off. Joe threw me off.
You bet. So the question is, who's the most vulnerable?
Okay.
Who's the buyer? And again, adults, children, go.
Okay. So most vulnerable, there's lots of different situations there. But one thing that I've noticed is it's really hard for people to understand what grooming is and how maybe a predator might look out for someone, right? You guys all understand cults? You guys all understand how people can be drawn into cults? Do you know that some of the most famous cult members, like Charles Manson, do you know where he learned how to draw people in? In prison from a pimp. It's the same thing. You find something, you find a void, and then you find a way to fill it. And then you get them addicted to that fill, that need. Maybe you get them addicted to drugs then. Maybe they're already addicted to drugs and you use that. Maybe they're having situations at home. Maybe their dad wasn't around and they're trying to fill that. They're going to find what your void is and they're going to fill it and they're going to use it against you. And it creates something called a trauma bond. It is a form of Stockholm syndrome. It's a form of brainwashing. And so it's very hard. And so when you do go into these situations and these children and these adults are recovered, they don't want your help. It's not like the movies. I know that there's a big movie right now. It's not even the movie's fault because it doesn't say that it is in America. It is very bold that it leaves the States and dealing with it elsewhere. So I don't even blame the movie. It's everyone else taking it that way. With that said, it's very, very hard to understand what all the vulnerabilities are because every single person is an individual. Like Kelly said, every single person is different. Kelly came from a very influential family and all. That's her story to tell. But, we would never think that, especially here in Douglas County. right? And so it's more about watching your kids, knowing what it is, making sure they have a safe place to go, making sure they have a safe person to talk to. And your kid, I'm a mother too. We're all going to give our kids a reason to need therapy, right? It's just part of parenting. Okay. So nobody can be perfect. But with that said, it's very, very hard to detect and it's very hard to see what that vulnerability is. But traffickers and pimps and predators are skilled at seeking them out, and they will find them and they will use them. The buyers, statistically, it's someone from our community. It's a middle-aged man married with 2 children who's white. Most buyers are people that you sit at a soccer game with. They're not who everybody on social media thinks they are. That's not what it is. It's not drag queens, no matter what you feel about them. It's not necessarily a priest, no matter what you think about them. It's not the black guy walking down the street with the baggy pants. Statistically, buyers are people you're sitting next to and having dinner with.
So
So with that,
okay,
we just
so
had,
it's apologies, Commissioner, but I'm chasing the timeline here. So this doesn't sound like an easy thing to enforce. Sheriff, how does the Sheriff's Department get involved? How does law enforcement get involved? What happens?
There's many different ways. Our deputies are very well trained. So whether it be from a traffic stop and they see something on that stop that doesn't look right, to a doctor that might notice something during an examination, they alert law enforcement. Runaways, when we have a runaway report, the deputies are trained to try and gather as much information as possible as far as who that individual might be with. When we have a return runaway report, when that juvenile comes back home, our deputies are trained to ask the right questions to determine who they were with, if they'll talk to us, anything that occurred while they were gone. And so we try to get as much information as possible, and if necessary, do an offense report or incident report. Those reports are then forwarded to our special victims units detectives. Sometimes, depending on the circumstances, the detectives will come out to the scene and conduct additional interviews that night or wherever it's occurring. But the detectives will then follow up. It may go to the FBI Innocence Lost Task Force. It may stay with the Special Victims Unit, but we'll work a case from there and try and develop a case and a suspect and start a criminal investigation.
Okay, thank you, Sheriff.
You know,
Now,
I
Jacob,
wanted to just dig in just a little bit because I think this is important from a Douglas County perspective. And several years ago, I think pre-COVID, Janelle, you and I were talking about this very issue, and you're like, no, Commissioner, it's not what you think. Well, it got me fired up many years ago, but it was just this whole deal of, it's at the cheerleading squad where you have a girl telling another girl, hey, there's a guy downtown that'll pay $100 for a photo of you topless. And then that young girl gets blackmailed and told, if you don't do what I tell you to do, we're going to share this photo with your family and your friends. And I mean, that was very eye-opening to me. I mean, what is it? Different deal. Yeah. How does it, so can you tell us more about how does it look in Douglas County?
Short answer, trafficking looks the same here as it looks in Denver, as it looks in Texas, anywhere like that. It's the same. At the end of the day, the exploitation is the same. The violation is the same. The trafficker is the same. But the person and the individual is still victimized, but they still have their own story. They still have their own way to heal. They still have different needs that we have to do. And that's why when he says that they make those things, I show up. What's your needs assessment? What do you need? Emergent needs. What do we need to do for you right now to make you okay? And then the rest comes later. That's it. But it looks the same here as it looks everywhere else. I mean, it's simple. Jacob and I have talked about this.
thank you. Roger, I think we have an online question. Is that correct?
We're going to go to the phone first and hear from Margot. Then we'll do an online question. Margot, go ahead.
Hey, it's Margot Knudsen. I already had 2 of my 3 questions answered by you guys, and I really appreciate that. I guess my question would be, I don't have young children, but I would really like to be involved in helping, I guess, ferret out these traffickers, or to have an eye open to, I guess, looking at situations of children that are being trafficked or possibly being trafficked. Is there a mechanism where we can get involved as just a community or a community member in assisting either law enforcement or organizations, the county, whatever?
I'm going to let our experts take this, but hi, Margot. And one thing that helped me understand this as a layperson is connect with the people in your sphere. It starts with you and your son or daughter or your granddaughter or grandson, your family members, and working within your own community. What would the experts say or add to that? Sure.
Margot, we have all kinds of volunteer opportunities at Covered. We've got people that come in and help us in the office. We've got people that go out and speak in the community and help us teach and educate others in the community. And then we've also got people who work with the survivors. There's a lot of training that goes into that before we plug you in with a survivor. But we have a lot of opportunities to volunteer. So we are at coveredcolorado.org, and we'd love to get you involved.
All right, next we have an online question from Marcia. She asks, how can we, the citizens of this county, assist law enforcement in shutting this down here?
I'll jump in here. If you see something, say something. A lot of times people are hesitant to get involved if they see something that's really bothering them. We encourage you to call 911. If you guys see something in a store, you see something in a park, you see something anywhere, that doesn't sit right with you, let us get out there, let us investigate and figure out what's going on. Recently, I was at a resort with my family, and I had another family member say, you know what, I saw something last night that was just really suspicious. I don't know if it was a trafficking situation or whatever. This is somebody in my family. I'm like, well, why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you call? Why didn't you say something? And we didn't have plates. We didn't have, we had poor vehicle descriptions. People are just hesitant to get involved. But if you truly care and you truly want to do something about it, call law enforcement immediately and get us out there and let us investigate.
All right. So let's go ahead. Want to talk about survivor stories from the nonprofit perspective. Kelly, what can you tell? We alluded to your survivor story earlier and the perspective you bring to your work. What would you like to share with us tonight?
Thank you. Yeah, so I was just the, everyday average girl. I mean, I went to Evergreen High School. I graduated from Evergreen High School, and, came from a divorced family, where my trafficker was my biological father. And so, and really it was early on, as an early child, I was told, you don't say anything. You don't share what's happening. If you share something, I will kill your mother. I'll kill your brother. And so, we are conditioned from an early age. And then also when you think it's normal, when you don't know any better as a child, you think what's happening to you is normal. And I thought every girl was going through that. I thought all of my friends were going through that too. And we just weren't supposed to talk about it. And it actually wasn't until I was 13 years old sitting in health class. And we started talking, we didn't even have the word trafficking. So human trafficking laws haven't actually been around. The TVPA Act, the Trafficking Prevention and Persons Act, was 2000. So it's been 23 years. That's it. But human trafficking has been, as age as old as time. And, we always say, we talk about how like prostitution, right, is the oldest profession in the world. I would argue to say it's actually the oldest oppression in the world. And so, and you go back even like biblical times and we talk about stuff like that. And we're not really recognizing or understanding how that happens, how the vulnerabilities happen. So not only like, within my case, it was actually, it was a family member happening at home. And I was afraid. I was afraid to say something. And then when I did, nobody heard me and nobody listened. And so, you become conditioned to, well, this is just what it's supposed to be. And so I learned to live two dual lives. It was when I had to visit my biological father, there was the abuse that went on there. But when I was back home up in the mountains, I was one of the top soccer players in the state. I mean, I had almost a 4.0. I mean, I went to college. all of this stuff. And so I was just the everyday girl that was around as well. Some of the things that I'm seeing now more within my work in walking, that is outside of the family structures and the familial trafficking side, because familial trafficking is probably one of the most underreported and under talked about forms of human trafficking. And that's really where it's somebody that's known to the person. Or the child. So it's a family member, it's a friend, it's somebody around them. But there's the other vulnerabilities where you've got kids that are vulnerable, where they run away. I mean, in the work that I do, especially with minors, I'll tell you the two biggest areas that I have seen that are absolutely pipelines or complacent to human trafficking that's going on of children and minors is our foster care system. So again, like Margot, if you're listening, hi. And then also if you want to do something, think about becoming a foster parent. We've got so many vulnerable children, and that pipeline there is absolutely crucial to making sure that they feel safe, that they feel wanted, that they feel valued, and that they actually have inherent dignity. And then the other area too that I'm really recognizing, and we did a study, so nearly 89% of child trafficking survivors have had one or more appointment at a facility like Planned Parenthood within the United States. And that is the one area where children are absolutely being missed. And we talk about even in emergency rooms and stuff like that. I will tell you, emergency rooms, hospitals, they're doing a lot better. But our abortion care centers and places like that is where survivors will say, I was taken there not only once or twice within my lifetime as a minor. My pimp actually took me. They didn't take my ID. They didn't ask for my name. They didn't even ask what the relationship was with the pimp. All he said was, he's my uncle, or he's a friend or somebody, but they saw me over and over and over. And so, those are some areas that we have to have these hard conversations. And I know it's a hard political conversation. Nobody wants to have it. We absolutely need to have it, because if we don't, then we are absolutely complacent in what's happening around our country, because these are places where, and pimps will tell you, I mean, like Janelle's met pimps, Joanna's met pimps, like they will tell you the safest place for me to take one of my trafficking victims who has an STD, who has an unwanted pregnancy or anything is Planned Parenthood of the Rockies here in Colorado. No questions are asked. And so those are some things too. And I'm not saying don't rush down, and please don't throw tomatoes at these places. But also, if you are a prayerful person, I mean, I've spoken to pro-life groups all around the country, and I've said to them, when you stand out there and you are judging that woman for walking in there, you don't know what she's been through or why she's there. And so if you're going to stand out there and judge her in the name of your religion or your belief system, you have effectively probably lost that victim and that survivor. And so there are ways that we've got to have, how do we have these conversations as a society? And how do we really recognize that everybody is born with inherent dignity? But we live in a society where we place value on people. People are product, profit, or pleasure. And until we come to even around the world as a human race, until we recognize that we no longer are going to do that to people, we're never going to end this scourge. And I'm just going to be completely honest. It's going to always continue.
Wow.
So Kelly, thank you for that story of your survivorship. Janelle, would you like to talk about your organization and some trends that you might see going on?
Yeah, so my organization, we are the only third-party case management, as I said, that assists law enforcement and governmental agencies. And I know Margot's question was talking about how she can assist law enforcement. That was my question a long time ago. Who I was when I first started this, my organization, myself, or anything that I do is not the same. But I'm lucky enough now to be able to assist and go on undercover operations where I sat for a year and didn't speak. I learned. I watched. I went through extensive background stuff and I learned. And now I'm able to be considered an expert or a trusted person when there's a recovery to show up and give them those basic needs. I'm not an officer, which is actually, I think, a comfort to the person at that time. There's obviously law enforcement victim advocates, but they're still considered law enforcement. I am not. I'm working with law enforcement, and my whole mission is to help bridge that gap So a lot of these victims don't have a good law enforcement experience, and I want them to have that. And like we said, you guys have one of the best human trafficking teams here at Denver FBI with all of the TFOs from different agencies, and they do so much great work. I've seen it, and I will stand up for them anytime. It is very victim-centered, and that is what we do. We focus on that, and then we follow that child from recovery to sentencing, pre-indictment to post-indictment. We are making sure that they have trauma-informed things within their school. We're making sure family therapy is put in place. We're making sure that if they are, if there's poverty in their home and they are coming from a struggling family, we're making sure those parents have food in their fridge. We're making sure the kids have rides to school. We're making sure that individual therapy is in place. We are attending all those school meetings. We are attending DHS meetings. We are doing all of those things to make every single piece of their walk, which can take 1 to 3 years from start to finish, from recovery to sentencing, it can be very long. And so our goal is to take that burden for them and then put long-term things in place for them. And that's when Joanna comes in.
And speaking of Joanna, it's your turn.
Yeah, so we're the second house in Colorado. So out of Colorado, there are tens of thousands of people, probably more. That's a very conservative number being trafficked in Colorado. We are only the second house. We can take about 6, and then there's another house up north that can take about 6 as well. So that tells you how desperate we are for housing. Within the last 72 hours, just the last 72 hours, my team has fielded 28 crisis calls. Those are 28 separate calls from survivors needing help. And so we're drowning a bit because we have so many people coming our way. A lot of people don't understand how an adult can be trafficked. Well, first of all, adults, children grow up and they become adults. So a lot of people who have been trafficked as children, they grow up, they don't get the resources they need, they end up on the street, and that's when we run into them and then try to help them from there. But sometimes adults are trafficked. Jacob alluded to this earlier through coercion, and we worked with a woman for years, and this is it's so important to understand. We talked about how to recognize it. Well, it's so important to understand that a survivor's prison, a victim's prison is it's mental, it's emotional, it's not physical. So you will have people walking around. Somebody is not tied to a wall, chained to a wall. That's just not how it happens. We've worked with hundreds of survivors, and I think I know of one that maybe that was their story, but that's not how it happens. There was a survivor that we worked with who came and sat in a coffee house here in Douglas County. She did that because that was the only place she could feel normal. She was actively being trafficked. The people that were sitting around her having coffee had no idea that they were sitting next to a trafficking victim at the moment. So they are walking around. They look like you and I. We worked with a woman who they would fly her around the country. She would never have anyone go with her. She would always come back, and she said that she would always come back because they kept her 2-year-old. So all of that too, that's just something that it's important to understand when thinking about the adult victims. Adults are absolutely trafficked. So we help those adults work through their trauma, and that's what we do at Covered House.
I don't see the sign guy yelling. So, he's yelling. Okay, I'll make it quick. Okay. Just to add to that, when you were speaking about how it's not physical capture, it's psychological capture. One thing I want you to know is that takes time. It does. But there are situations when it comes to breaking, right? And there's multiple situations where I've seen people be psychologically broken without ever being touched, right? Like you said, the 2-year-old, things like that. It takes time to get them over an addiction. And one thing I want you guys to remember is that these traffickers, we always hear about drug trafficking and gun trafficking and all of that. You can sell a gun one time. You can sell a bag of drugs one time. You can sell a person over and over and over again. So they're willing to put more time into what they would consider their product. As hard as that is to swallow and hard as that is to say out loud, it is the face of domestic trafficking, international trafficking even. And so I just thought that was really important to add on that when you're talking about it not being chained and it being psychological capture. And that's how it happens. They take the time to make that happen, to build those walls.
Well, thank you so much for that. And I just want to really thank Kelly for sharing that personal story with all of us and educating us. I think it's really valuable to hear from you. So thank you. I also want to thank everybody here who has joined us in the room and for taking your time with us. So I'd love to go out into the hearing room if anybody has any questions. Yeah. Yes, ma'am. Hi, sure.
So my question is really about schools. What I would like to know is, at what point are they educated? And do you ever, so you said there's one person in every high school. So do you talk to the schools, or do you expect the schools to actually do that education? And the second part of that question is, are the parents actually brought in as part of that education process? Because, as you're quite right, parents don't always listen. And so if you go to 7 adults, that's pretty darn awful. And so, one would hope that that education program could be done in a high school at the same time. And so is that done?
It's a great question, panel.
We actually did get into some schools out east. So we educated 6 schools out in Elbert County, out east in Colorado. It was kind of neat how the school set it up. They had me come in during the day and I talked to the kids, and really we just talked about online predator behavior. I just talked with them, helping them understand what that looked like. I said, I don't want to tell you not to live your life, but I do want you to know what to watch for. And so that's what we did during the day. And then at night, the parents and the teachers came back, and then I talked with them about, this is what we talked to your kids about that morning, and then let them ask questions, because that's the win right there. Is it's a win educating our kids in our schools, absolutely, but we also need to be educating parents and teachers as well. So I think they did that very, very well.
Well, and I want to add within our, one of the issues that we see, so we have data that shows that about 23% of traffickers are actually under the age of 18. So this is minors perpetrating on minors. And we really see this, especially within our school system. So I'm going to say, to parents, and I've heard Janelle say this, and I've heard Joanna say this, if you are paying for your child's technology, get into it, take a look at it, but also talk to your children, because things like, and our kids, like I've got 4 kids, you guys, and, 2 are going off to college, one's an adult, one's in high school here. They're dumb, you guys, sometimes when it comes to understanding and letting them know, like if you take a picture of yourself and you send it to a boyfriend or somebody who's asking for it, that's not illegal, right? To do that, to send it. But if you break up and that boyfriend or girlfriend uses that and then sends it to their friends, and it's being sent on the internet or any type, like that actually turns into a crime. And so we really try to talk to these kids about, like, not only about the vulnerabilities that they have, but also the criminality that they actually have too, and recognizing that too. And so especially within our school systems, and I'm thankful, like Joanna was able to get in. I mean, I know that like Janelle and I, like we've tried even separately to get into school districts across this state. And again, we're met with, we don't have this here. And I get it, you guys, as teachers, it's really hard. Like they have so many things that they are expected to do. They're expected to parent our children because there's a lot of parents out there that are not doing that job. There's a lot of parents that are just letting their kids do whatever they want to do, and their friends. You guys, if you choose to have children, you are not their best friends. They may hate you for it, but you will protect them if you recognize and you hold them accountable and responsible for the choices that they make. And I can't stress this enough, especially within our schools. And as parents, you are responsible for your children. It's not the teacher's job to educate them. It's not the community's job. We're having to step up and do that because parents are unwilling to have those conversations with their children. Have a basic conversation about sex with your children. Have a basic conversation about, like if you send a topless picture to your friend, once that's out there, that is never going away. Because the internet is a cruel, cruel place. And people can post stuff on the internet that is not always true all the time. And people hide behind the internet. They hide behind the keyboards. And really, when that happens, it's up to us to educate our children and to say, this is true, this is not. Let's figure out what's real. But if you post photos and you send them out there, once you send that out there, it's no longer in your hands. And then recognizing too, like at what rate does that 17-year-old young boy, typically, who is now sharing pictures with all of his football team of his ex-girlfriend, at what point now does he have a criminal liability? And that is going to mess up the rest of his future. And so those are hard conversations that we have to have as parents.
Thank you, Kelly. And I'm Roger. How are we doing on time? Next, Commissioner Teal, phone question.
All right. Well, Roger, we have a phone question.
All right, let's hear from Sally next. Go ahead.
Thank you so much.
Ma'am, you still there? We're listening.
All right, let's try Jan next. Jan, go ahead.
Hi, I'm concerned about the boys. We haven't talked about the boys tonight.
Actually, that's
They get
kind of a
sex
really good
trafficked, too.
question. Yeah, that's a really good question. Panelist?
Boys.
Pardon me?
Yeah. So statistically, we know roughly, so boys are the one area that they are the most underreported, even more than girls. And girls are very underreported. So when we get statistics or data that comes in, like I usually end up doubling it because I know that it's underreported. We know within the United States that boys are about 50% of our victims. And so it's not just girls. It's not just like, even with pimps, there are female pimps out there, you guys. It's not all males that are pimps. And so, we recognize that and we know that we don't have the services for boys like we do for girls. And additionally too, yeah, Janelle does. But I'm saying we don't have as many services, and we don't have the resources. We don't have, I think we have, at last check, there was just under, I think 1,300 beds across the United States for minor victims of human trafficking. And only if they're still in operation, and only 20 were actually open to boys. And so that's, and I do know in Colorado, there's an organization that's trying to partner and bring in a home for boys. But, again, like that's not it's hard to get donors to really support that. Even with adults, again, the only difference between a minor victim of human trafficking and an adult victim, it's 60 seconds on their 18th birthday. That's it. They have the trauma, they have everything else. And so we literally expect, and I know we have laws, they're black and white. And so we have different thresholds for 18-year-olds, but we can't expect them to operate as an adult if they've never actually been given that opportunity or the resources or the agency to understand that.
Okay, very good.
It's such a good discussion. And I think, for all those that are listening and maybe here in person, you're thinking, what can we possibly do? I mean, this is an overwhelming situation. So with all this information, what can we do to help? And I'll ask our Sheriff DA's office and all of our panelists to provide some tips for our community.
Yeah, I'll turn it over to Jacob.
Like Sheriff Weekly had said earlier, the biggest thing that we can do in the community is if you see something, say something. And we understand that it's really a difficult thing sometimes to pick up the phone and dial 911 because you're worried if you're reporting someone you perceive as dangerous, that maybe you're putting yourself at risk or something along those lines. And we always want you to know that there's many avenues that you can report something like this. I know that the statewide and the national human trafficking hotlines are numbers that are going to be posted on the website here. Those are a great opportunity for you to call and provide information. You can provide it in an anonymous fashion as well. Every single one of those tips is distilled to the local law enforcement agency and that jurisdiction. I receive those emails almost daily of, hey, we received this tip. And I can tell you that within 15, 20 minutes of that email landing in all of our collective inboxes, somebody's responding on it. We're going to look into it. We'll have officers call and respond. At its core, human trafficking is an awareness driven problem. And it's having these discussions, tuning in right now, sitting in this room, you are taking the step to start to combat this problem, just learning about what human trafficking is. And when we have those tips and we gather all of this information, law enforcement's able to conduct operations into looking at traffickers and looking for survivors of human trafficking. Just this last month in July, law enforcement across the Front Range and across the country engaged in a large-scale operation called Operation Cross Country. We had almost 40 agencies here in Colorado that worked collectively to identify and try to recover victims of human trafficking. We had here in Colorado 27 victims of human trafficking that we recovered in just a 2-day period, 9 of those being children. So this is something that we do every single year. And Colorado is typically one of the leading states for victim recoveries during this operation. So sometimes these cases take time. Sometimes you reach out and you say something and you don't hear something. And it's not because we're not doing anything about it. It's because we understand the trauma that goes into engaging with the court process. And we want to make sure that when we really get that ball rolling, that we're going to be effective, not only with our arrest and investigation, but with our prosecution as well. So while these things do take times, 1 to 3 years from the time someone's arrested to the time they're sentenced sometimes, there is a system in place, and all it takes is for you to pick up the phone and report something, and it will get in the appropriate hands.
Thanks so much for that, Sheriff.
I don't have a whole lot to add in addition to that. It's very critical that we are brought into it on the front end, and I think that is the best way to take care of our victims. I serve on the Colorado Human Trafficking Council, and even in that forum, there's a little hesitation to cooperate with law enforcement. I'll be honest with you, I kind of feel like the outsider of that group because they don't embrace the fact that we do care. We are concerned about the victims and we want to bring justice for these victims. But in order to do that, we need to be brought into the loop and included. We are a very critical component of this entire problem and addressing the issues.
Thanks, Sheriff. Absolutely, Janelle.
To add to everything that they said, just when it comes to bridging that gap between law enforcement, like if you look at one of our seals, it's 2 hands and there's a blue line in between. That's what FSTS wants to do. We want to bridge that gap. We want them to get justice. I've seen so many victims and survivors not speak up in time and they regretted it later. No one ever forces them to. They don't have to. The whole point is to give them a good experience. Because if there is physical evidence, police are moving in and going to do something anyway, because you don't want that trafficker to hurt another person. The victim doesn't have to cooperate. That is their choice. They do not have to. But if they choose to, we want to make sure that the experience is comfortable and trauma-informed and victim-centered, and that they're part of the process, that they get part of this process. And I think that for so long, it's been such a bad experience with law enforcement in Colorado is really trying to change that narrative. And I see them do good things every day that, I can tell you, Darren does want that. The Human Trafficking Task Force and Child Exploitation Task Force here, they want that. Jacob wants that. He's very victim focused, and he's your human trafficking DA in this county. And so I think you guys can feel confident with those things.
It's awesome. In our limited time, Kelly.
Yeah, and I think from a victim standpoint, and that's one of the things that I do across the United States is work with survivors to help them, get access to legal means, and also to really to understand that the relationship between law enforcement, that there has to be something, because we don't just live in a vigilante society. That, I mean, some people do, but we really don't. As far as there is a process, and there's the way that things have to happen, and we have to have documentation. We have to have, we've got to have the records and stuff like that. And so, the hardest thing is getting victims to come forward and actually testify on their own behalf, because without that, we don't have cases. And that's the biggest thing that we're trying to make sure that we get victims to understand. If you want to get justice, you have to cooperate. You have to follow through. You have to work with the organizations who provide the resources. And we have survivors across the board that they won't do that. They're not comfortable with that. And at the end of the day, if you're not willing to do that, then they also have to understand then, they're not going to get the justice that they want. And then they have to be okay with that too. And so, and we really try to get survivors to do that. There's also statute of limitations. And so we have to recognize that as well. But really getting survivors to be comfortable, it's hard, especially in this day and age, because we have become such an anti-law enforcement society. But at the end of the day, they're here to protect us. And it always baffles me that, especially survivors, I say this, I'm like, why are you bashing law enforcement? But who's the first person you're going to call when a trafficker comes into your house or somebody comes into your house with a gun? And they're like, well, the police. I'm like, okay, well then, at what point we have to figure out, how do we trust each other? And that's one of the things that I work on doing across the board with survivors.
And then Johanna, anything else we can do as a community before we move into our wrap up?
Yes, working together. I love this conversation because one of the things we try to do is help survivors build that trust again. Traffickers will build in, distrust of law enforcement, and so that's what we're trying to do. Yeah, that they'll be in trouble. We're trying to help build that back up as well. But as far as what the community, how the community can get involved, what get the community to do to help, we do in-depth trainings. It really comes back to being educated and understanding what this looks like, because it can be right in front of you. But if you think it looks like that, then you're going to be looking for this, and it's sitting right in front of you. So it really is getting educated and understanding what it actually looks like. We do trainings every other month. With our next one is on September 11th in the evening, and you can find that on our website at coveredcolorado.org. But then also, what else the community can do is, what we do in our organizations, we are all privately funded. And so it's expensive work trying to help victims recover and work through this trauma. And so I know that all of our organizations consistently need donors to help us in this work and take care of survivors.
Thank you so much. So we'll move into our wrap up. Sheriff Weekly.
I have nothing to add. I think we covered it. And I think it's critical, again, notify law enforcement.
Well, thank you for that. And I know we could talk for a while about this topic. I think for me, I am just so deeply appreciative of everybody on this panel, for our DA's office, for law enforcement, and the deep commitment that our Board of County Commissioners and everybody in this room has to serving those that are being victimized. I want to thank everybody here in this room for being here and taking your time to learn and share with us. I truly believe that we represent nearly 400,000 people. Many will not take a training. And so I think the encouragement is, look out for the people in your care, get to know the young people that you are in charge of, and look out for those signs. Commissioner Teal.
Well, I too would like to thank the panelists. Again, I started this evening by saying this is a topic I did not know a lot about. I really appreciate the information that was put out. I felt like I learned something. I hope all of you, thank you for coming. I hope you learned something too. Commissioner Thomas.
I think what we heard from the questions are about the community. What are the schools doing? But what I heard that really made the most sense to me is about parenting, that parents need to be involved in their kids' lives, and they need to be the parent and not the best friend. And so if you are a grandparent or a parent, I think what I hear is that we need to take time to listen to our grandkids, our granddaughters, and our grandsons, our sons and our daughters. And we need to listen to them and make sure that there is an environment in which they feel safe, that they can talk, and that they can really be heard and recognized. I think that's what I heard here. So thank you for everyone who is here online. If you didn't get your questions answered, come on up. And I always like to end these with good night and God bless. Thank you.
Thank you, commissioners. If you have something to report or need to get help, you can call the Colorado's Human Trafficking Hotline. It's open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. That number is 866-455-5075. You can also text 720-999-9724. So that's the Colorado's Human Trafficking Hotline. On behalf of Douglas County, thank you for joining us this evening. If we did not get to your question tonight, we invite you to submit a question on this or any other topic at douglas.co.us/citizen connect. You can do that at any time. And we hope you will join us again for a future town hall. And we thank you and wish you a good night.